I never imagined that I would find myself in such a tangled mess, caught between family loyalty and the allure of forbidden attraction. At 34, my life in Manchester was fairly stable. I worked as a freelance photographer, a career that gave me the freedom to pursue my passion for capturing the world through my lens. My personal life, however, was far less structured. I had recently ended a long-term relationship, and I was still navigating the murky waters of being single again. Family had always been my anchor, especially my sister, Claire. Claire was a few years older than me, married to James, a charming and successful lawyer who had always treated me like a part of their family. They were the quintessential power couple, beautiful, accomplished, and seemingly perfect together. I often envied their life, wishing I could find the same kind of love that Claire had found with James. One weekend, Claire had to travel to Edinburgh for a work conference, leaving James alone at their house. She asked me to drop by and water the plants, check the mail, and make sure everything was in order while she was away. I didn't mind helping out. After all, Claire had always been there for me, and this was the least I could do. It was a Friday evening when I stopped by their house, expecting to quickly handle my tasks and head back home. But as I pulled up to the driveway, I noticed James was already home, sitting on the front porch with a glass of wine in hand. He waved as I approached, his usual friendly smile in place. "Hey, Olivia," he called out, standing up to greet me. "Didn't expect to see you until tomorrow. Come on up, join me for a drink?" I hesitated for a moment, but then shrugged off my reservations. It was just a drink with my brother-in-law. Nothing unusual about that. "Sure," I said, smiling back. "One glass won't hurt." We sat on the porch, sipping wine and chatting about everything from work to weekend plans. James was easy company, and our conversation flowed naturally, filled with laughter and light-hearted banter. I was grateful for the distraction. It was nice to unwind and forget about my own troubles for a while. But as the evening wore on, I noticed a shift in James's demeanor. His compliments became a little too personal, his gaze lingering a bit too long. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to the wine and the late hour, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite shake. "You know, Olivia," James said, leaning back in his chair and studying me intently, "you're really something special. I've always admired your spirit, your independence. Claire talks about you all the time, and I can see why." I laughed awkwardly, trying to deflect the compliment. "Thanks, James. I'm just doing my best, like everyone else." "No, really," he insisted, his tone earnest. "You're different. You've got this energy, this spark that's refreshing. It's rare to find someone who's so unapologetically themselves." I smiled, though I could feel my cheeks warming under his gaze. "That's kind of you to say, but I think you're giving me too much credit." James shook his head, his eyes never leaving mine. "Not at all. I mean it. I've always thought you were remarkable." There was a pause, the air between us growing heavy with unspoken tension. I shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. This was James, my sister's husband, a man who should have been completely off limits. But the way he was looking at me, the intensity of his gaze, made it hard to ignore the pull I felt. "James, I should probably get going," I said, standing up and glancing at my watch. "It's getting late." He stood up as well, moving closer, and for a brief moment, I thought he might try to kiss me. But instead, he simply took my hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Olivia, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said quietly. I enjoy your company, and sometimes I feel like I can be more myself around you than anyone else." I stared at him, my mind racing with conflicting thoughts. I knew this was wrong, that whatever was happening between us needed to stop before it went any further. Claire was my sister, my best friend, and I couldn't betray her trust. But there was also a part of me that was undeniably drawn to James, to the way he made me feel seen and appreciated. "James, this isn't right," I said firmly, pulling my hand away. "You're married to my sister. I can't do this." He nodded, his expression remorseful. "I know, and I'm sorry if I crossed a line. I never meant to put you in an awkward position." "It's okay," I replied, though my voice was shaky. "But I think it's best if I go." I left quickly, my mind buzzing with the implications of what had just happened. As I drove home, I replayed the evening in my head, wondering how things had spiraled so quickly out of control. I knew that James's words and actions were inappropriate, but I couldn't deny the flutter of excitement they had stirred in me. It was a dangerous feeling, one that I knew I had to quash before it took root. Over the next few days, I tried to put the incident behind me, focusing on work and avoiding any unnecessary contact with James. I ignored his texts, kept my visits to their house strictly business, and did my best to act as if nothing had happened. But the memory of that evening lingered, a nagging reminder of the line that had been crossed. Then, one evening, as I was sorting through some photos at home, I received a call from James. "Hey, Olivia," he said, his voice cautious. "I just wanted to check in. I hope I didn't make things weird the other night. I've been feeling terrible about it." "It's fine, James," I said, trying to sound casual. "Let's just forget it ever happened." "I'd like to," he admitted, "but I can't stop thinking about it, about you." My heart skipped a beat, a mix of anxiety and something else, something I didn't want to acknowledge. "James, we can't do this," I repeated, though my resolve was weakening. "Claire is my sister. It's not okay." "I know," he said, his voice strained. "But I can't help how I feel. I'm not asking for anything, Olivia. I just needed to be honest." I sighed, rubbing my temples as I tried to process his words. "James, I don't want to hurt Claire. She doesn't deserve this." He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the regret in his voice when he finally spoke. "You're right, she doesn't. And I don't want to hurt her either. I'm sorry, Olivia. I should never have put you in this position." We ended the call on a somber note, and I was left feeling more conflicted than ever. I wanted to do the right thing, to protect my relationship with Claire and uphold the boundaries that had been crossed. But the truth was, James's attention had awakened something in me that I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of being desired, of being seen. The following weekend, Claire returned from her conference, and she invited me over for dinner to catch up. I was hesitant at first, unsure of how I would navigate the evening with James there, but I didn't want to raise any suspicions. I put on my bravest face and went, determined to keep things as normal as possible. When I arrived, Claire greeted me with her usual exuberance, pulling me into a tight hug. "I missed you," she exclaimed, beaming. "It's been too long." "Missed you too," I replied, forcing a smile. "How was Edinburgh?" "Oh, the usual." "Prosody." "Lots of meetings and not nearly enough time to explore," she said, rolling her eyes. "But I'm glad to be back. It's always better at home." As we settled into the evening, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt every time I glanced at James. He was his usual charming self, playing the role of the perfect husband, and it was almost easy to forget the tension that had simmered between us. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was betraying Claire, even if nothing had actually happened. After dinner, Claire went to the kitchen to grab dessert, leaving James and me alone in the living room. I kept my focus on my phone, trying to avoid any eye contact, but James leaned in, his voice low and urgent. "Olivia, we need to talk," he said, his tone serious. "I can't keep pretending that everything is fine." I looked at him, my stomach churning. "James, this isn't the time." "When is the right time?" he pressed, his eyes pleading. "I can't ignore this anymore. I need to know where we stand." "James, we don't stand anywhere," I said firmly, though my heart was pounding. "We can't. This has to stop." He nodded, his expression pained. "I know, but it doesn't make it any easier." Before I could respond, Claire returned with a tray of desserts, blissfully unaware of the charged exchange that had just taken place. I plastered on a smile, determined to keep up appearances, and tried to focus on the conversation. But every time I glanced at James, I could see the unspoken tension in his eyes, and I knew that things were far from resolved. As I left their house that night, I felt a heavy weight on my shoulders. I knew that the situation with James was a ticking time bomb, one that could explode at any moment and shatter the delicate balance of our lives. I wanted to protect Claire, to keep our bond intact, but I also knew that I couldn't continue to ignore the simmering attraction that lingered between James and me. In the days that followed, I kept my distance, throwing myself into work and avoiding any contact with James. But the guilt gnawed at me, and I knew that I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I had to make a decision, to either confront the situation head-on or walk away entirely. One afternoon, as I was editing photos in my studio, I received a text from James. "Olivia, I need to talk to you. Please. It's important." I stared at the message, my heart racing. I knew that meeting him could open a Pandora's box of emotions, but I also knew that I couldn't keep running from the truth. I needed closure, for myself and for Claire. "Okay, let's meet at the park near your house." When I arrived at the park, James was already there, sitting on a bench and looking lost in thought. He glanced up as I approached, his expression a mix of relief and anxiety. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, standing up. "I know this isn't easy." "It's not," I replied, crossing my arms. "But we need to figure this out, James. This can't go on." He nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know, and I'm sorry, Olivia. I've been selfish, and I've let my feelings get in the way of what's right, but I also know that I care about you, more than I should." I looked at him, my resolve wavering. "James, I care about you too, but this isn't fair to Claire. We can't do this to her." "I know," he said quietly, "and I don't want to hurt her. I love her, but I can't ignore what I feel for you. It's tearing me apart." We stood there in silence, the weight of our words hanging between us. I wanted to make the right choice, to put an end to the turmoil that had consumed us both. But as I looked at James, I couldn't deny the connection that had grown between us, complex, messy, and utterly inconvenient. "James, we have to let this go," I said finally, my voice filled with determination. "For Claire's sake, for all of us." He nodded, though his expression was filled with sadness. "You're right. I wish things were different." "So do I admitted, feeling a pang of regret. "But we have to do what's best for her. We owe her that much." James reached out, taking my hand in his and squeezing it gently. "Thank you, Olivia, for being honest. I'll try to figure things out with Claire. I don't want to lose her." I nodded, squeezing his hand back before letting go. "Take care of her, James. She deserves it." As I walked away from the park, I felt a sense of closure, but also a lingering ache in my heart. I knew that my relationship with James would never be the same, that the lines we had crossed could never be fully erased. But I also knew that I had made the right choice, that my loyalty to Claire was more important than any fleeting attraction. In the days that followed, I focused on rebuilding my connection with Claire, determined to keep our bond strong despite the turmoil that had threatened to tear it apart. I kept my distance from James, respecting the boundaries we had set, and I found solace in the knowledge that I had done what was right. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough. And as I moved forward, I reminded myself that some connections, no matter how strong, are not meant to be, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go.